In the dusty heart of West Texas, where reputation means everything and bloodlines matter more than gold, a wealthy rancher named Jack Hollister made a decision that shocked the entire town. He adopted a child nobody wanted, a quiet, withdrawn girl with sad eyes and no past worth mentioning. The neighbors shook their heads. The businessmen called him foolish. Even his own foreman warned him against it. But Jack saw something in that little girl that others were too blind to notice. 20 years later, when drought strangled the land and greedy developers circled like vultures, when betrayal came from those he trusted most, it would be that same unwanted child who would stand between Jack and total ruin. But how could one woman save an empire built over generations? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun broke over the Hollister Ranch like it had for the past 140 years, painting the Texas sky in shades of copper and gold. Jack Hollister stood on the wraparound porch of the main house, a structure that had weathered generations of storms, both natural and personal. At 68, his frame still carried the strength of a man who had worked cattle since he could walk, though the silver in his hair and the lines etched deep around his eyes told stories of hard-won wisdom and quiet sorrows. He held a cup of coffee in one weathered hand, the steam rising in lazy spirals against the cool morning air. In his other hand, he turned over a silver pocket watch, its surface worn smooth by decades of handling. His father had carried it, and his grandfather before that. Engraved on the back in elegant script were the words, "A Hollister's word is his bond." Jack had lived by that motto his entire life, even when it cost him dearly. The sound of boots on gravel pulled his attention to the driveway. Sarah emerged from the barn, her long dark hair pulled back in a practical braid, dust already coating her jeans, despite the early hour. At 28, she moved with the confidence of someone who knew her place in the world and had fought hard to earn it. She carried a leather-bound ledger under one arm and had her phone pressed to her ear, nodding as she listened to whoever was on the other end. Jack felt the familiar swell of pride watching her. His daughter, not by blood, but by something stronger, by choice. By love, by the kind of bond that gets forged in the fires of doubt and criticism and emerges unbreakable. Sarah ended her call and climbed the porch steps, her expression a mix of determination and concern that Jack had come to recognize over the years. It was the look she wore when solving problems, and there were always problems on a ranch this size. "Miguel says the north pasture fence needs replacing," she said, setting the ledger down on the porch railing. "Third time this month, and the cattle in Section 7 are showing signs of stress. Water consumption is down." Jack nodded slowly. "The drought. It's getting worse." Sarah pulled out her phone and swiped through a series of charts and maps. "I've been tracking the rainfall data for the past 18 months. We're down 37% from the historical average. The aquifer levels across the county are dropping." The Hollister Ranch sprawled across 50,000 acres of prime Texas rangeland. It ran 1,500 head of cattle, had oil rights that provided steady income, and employed 32 full-time workers who depended on its success. Jack's great-grandfather had started with 200 acres and a dream. Each generation had built on that foundation, adding land, improving operations, establishing a reputation that meant something in this part of the world. "We've weathered droughts before," Jack said, though his voice carried less certainty than his words. Sarah leaned against the railing beside him. "Not like this one, Dad. I've been talking to Professor Martinez at the university. He says the climate patterns are shifting. This could last years, not months." She always called him Dad, had since she was 10 years old. The memory of the first time she said it still caught him off guard sometimes, the way she had whispered it hesitantly over breakfast, watching his face for a reaction. He had set down his fork, cleared his throat twice, and simply nodded, but she had seen the moisture in his eyes. The screen door creaked open, and Miguel Ortega stepped out, carrying his own cup of coffee. Miguel had been the ranch foreman for 23 years, since before Sarah arrived. He was 55, built like a bull, with hands that could gentle a spooked horse or rebuild an engine with equal skill. His family had worked the land alongside the Hollisters for 3 generations. "Morning, boss, Sarah." Miguel's voice carried the comfortable authority of a man who knew his worth. "Just got off the phone with the feed supplier. Prices are up again, 15% this quarter." Jack grimaced. The drought was driving up costs across the board. Feed, water transport, veterinary bills as stressed animals got sick more easily. The ranch was still profitable, but the margins were tightening. "We'll manage," Jack said, though the words felt hollow even to him. He took a long sip of coffee, letting the bitter warmth ground him in the present moment. Sarah exchanged a glance with Miguel. They had been having these conversations more frequently lately, dancing around the elephant in the room. The ranch was strong, but it wasn't invincible. Neither was Jack. "There's something else," Sarah said carefully. "I got a call yesterday from a development company out of Dallas. Thornton Development Corporation. They want to schedule a meeting to discuss potential opportunities." Jack's jaw tightened. "What kind of opportunities?" "They weren't specific, just said they're interested in the region and wanted to talk to major landowners." Sarah pulled out a business card and handed it to her father. The cardstock was expensive, embossed, the kind of card meant to impress. Jack studied it for a moment, then handed it back. "Tell them no." "Dad, we should at least hear what they have to say." "I know what they have to say. They want to buy land, parcel it up, develop it, turn rangeland into subdivisions and strip malls." Jack's voice hardened. "This land has been in our family for 4 generations. It'll stay in our family." Miguel cleared his throat. "They've been talking to other ranchers too. Clayton Webb met with them last week." The name hung in the air like smoke. Clayton Webb owned the neighboring spread to the west, 12,000 acres that had been in his family almost as long as the Hollister land had been in Jack's. The 2 families had a history, and not a pleasant one. "Webb can do what he wants with his land," Jack said flatly. "It's no concern of mine." But Sarah could see the tension in her father's shoulders, the way his fingers tightened around the coffee cup. The Webb family was a sore subject, had been for as long as she could remember. She had learned over the years not to push, but to file information away and work around the edges of old wounds. The sound of vehicle engines drew their attention to the main road. A convoy of trucks and SUVs kicked up dust as they rolled past the ranch entrance, heading west toward Webb's property. The vehicles were too clean, too new, too obviously from somewhere else. "Thornton people," Miguel muttered. Jack watched them pass, his expression unreadable. Then he turned and walked back into the house, the screen door slapping shut behind him. Sarah and Miguel stood in silence for a moment. Finally, Miguel spoke. "He's worried. I know. He won't admit it, but I see it. This drought, the rising costs, now these developers circling." Miguel shook his head. "And his health. I've seen him wince when he thinks nobody's watching," touching his chest. Sarah's heart constricted. "Has he seen a doctor? You know how he is, stubborn as a mule with twice the pride." She did know. Jack Hollister had built his entire life on strength and self-reliance. Admitting weakness, admitting that age and stress were taking their toll, would feel like betrayal to everything he stood for. "I'll talk to him," Sarah said. Miguel squeezed her shoulder. "You're good for him, best thing that ever happened to this ranch." After Miguel headed back to the barn, Sarah remained on the porch, looking out over the land that had become her home. She could still remember the first time she had seen it, 20 years ago. She had been 8 years old, small for her age, with tangled hair and eyes that had seen too much for a child. The social worker had driven her down this same driveway, past these same fields, and young Sarah had pressed her face to the car window, hardly daring to believe that this vast, beautiful place might become hers. The orphanage had been crowded and cold, a place where children learned to be invisible to avoid trouble. Sarah had been there for 2 years after her parents died, 2 years of being passed over by every couple who came looking for a child to love. She was too old, too quiet, too damaged by grief. Nobody wanted a child who barely spoke and flinched at sudden movements. But Jack Hollister had wanted her. She still didn't fully understand why. The town of Redemption Springs sat 15 miles east of the ranch, a collection of weathered buildings and stubborn pride that had survived boom and bust cycles since the 1880s. Population 3,000 and holding steady, give or take a few souls born or buried each year. Main Street still had the original courthouse, a limestone structure that anchored the town toke, surrounded by businesses that had served the community for decades. Sarah drove into town that afternoon in the ranch's dusty pickup truck, parking in front of Bernard Calhoun's law office. Bernard had been the Hollister family attorney for 30 years, handling everything from property disputes to oil lease negotiations. He was a fixture in Redemption Springs, a man whose handshake still meant something. The office smelled of old books and leather. Bernard looked up from his desk as Sarah entered, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. At 62, he had the comfortable appearance of a man who had found his place in the world and settled into it. "Sarah, good to see you. How's your father?" Stubborn as ever, she settled into the chair across from his desk. "Bernard, what do you know about Thornton Development Corporation?" His expression shifted, becoming more guarded. "They're making waves. Started approaching ranchers about 6 weeks ago. Quiet at first, but getting more aggressive." "What are they offering?" "Fair market value, sometimes above. They're particularly interested in properties with water access." Bernard leaned back in his chair. The drought has everyone on edge. Some of the smaller operations are considering selling. Sarah frowned. Dad got a call from them. He refused to even meet. "That sounds like Jack." Bernard paused, choosing his words carefully. "Sarah, I need to be straight with you. The ranch is in good shape, but this drought could change things fast. If it continues for another year, maybe 2, the operating costs are going to eat into reserves. The bank will start asking questions about the loan." "What loan?" Bernard's face fell. "He didn't tell you." "Tell me what?" "Last year, Jack took out a substantial loan, $2 million. He used it to upgrade the water infrastructure, dig new wells, install better irrigation systems. He was preparing for climate change, trying to drought-proof the operation." Bernard pulled out a file. "It was a smart move, but the loan comes due in 18 months. The bank wanted the ranch as collateral." Sarah felt her stomach drop. $2 million. With the improvements, the ranch can handle it. But if the drought gets worse, if cattle prices drop, if feed costs keep rising. Bernard didn't need to finish the sentence. She sat in silence, processing this information. Jack had been protecting her, trying to handle the burden alone. It was so typical of him, so infuriating and touching at the same time. "There's something else," Bernard said. "Clayton Webb has been meeting with Thornton pretty regularly. Word is he's considering selling his water rights. If he does that, it could affect everyone in the region." "How?" "The water table is interconnected. If Thornton starts pumping heavily from Webb's land, it could lower the water levels across multiple properties, including yours." Bernard tapped his fingers on the desk. "This is bigger than just individual ranches, Sarah. This is about the future of this entire community." Sarah drove back to the ranch with her mind spinning. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the fields, and she could see cattle clustered around water troughs, their ribs showing more than they should. The drought was visible everywhere once you knew to look for it. Dying grass, cracked earth, trees with leaves that hung limp and dusty. She found Jack in the stable, brushing down his favorite horse, a gray mare named Duchess, who was almost as old as Sarah. He worked with the steady, meditative rhythm of a man trying to quiet his thoughts through physical labor. "Bernard told me about the loan," Sarah said softly. Jack's hand stilled on the brush. He didn't turn around. I was going to tell you. When? After the bank started foreclosure proceedings. It won't come to that. Dad, we're supposed to be partners. You can't keep carrying everything alone. Jack finally turned to face her, and she saw the weight he had been carrying in his eyes. You're my daughter. It's my job to protect you, not burden you with problems. I'm not a child anymore, Sarah said, her voice firm but not unkind. I haven't been for a long time. This ranch is my life too. Every decision you make affects both of us. Jack set down the brush and leaned against the stable wall. For a moment he looked every one of his 68 years, the facade of strength cracking just enough to let her see the fear underneath. When your mother died, I thought I had lost everything that mattered. This ranch, the land, the legacy. It all felt hollow without her. He rarely spoke of his late wife, Catherine. She had died of cancer 12 years ago, before Sarah came into their lives. Sometimes Sarah wondered if that loss had been what opened Jack's heart to an orphan nobody wanted. Grief had taught him that family was about more than bloodlines. Then the social worker called about you. Jack continued, his voice softer now. Said there was a girl who needed a home. Turned, 8 years old, quiet. The other families passed on you because you didn't smile enough, didn't talk enough. They wanted a child who would love them immediately, who would fill their home with laughter from day one. He shook his head. Fools. All of them. Sarah felt her throat tighten. She had heard pieces of this story before, but never quite like this. The moment I saw you sitting in that social worker's office with your hands folded in your lap and your eyes on the floor, I knew you were mine, my daughter, not because you needed saving, but because I needed you. You gave me a reason to care about the future again. Dad, the word came out rough. So yes, I took out that loan without telling you. And yes, I've been trying to handle the drought and the developers and all of it on my own, because the thought of failing you, of losing this place that you've worked so hard to help build, that terrifies me more than anything. Jack met her eyes. But you're right, we're partners. I should have trusted you with the truth. Sarah crossed the stable and hugged him, something she didn't do often enough. Jack wrapped his arms around her, and for a moment they were just a father and daughter, holding on to each other against an uncertain world. We'll figure it out together, Sarah said. Whatever comes, we face it together. That evening, the ranch hands gathered in the mess hall for dinner. It was a tradition Jack's grandfather had started, feeding the crew family style at a long wooden table that had been built from timber harvested on the property. Miguel's wife Carmen did most of the cooking, and tonight she had made enough enchiladas and rice to feed an army. Sarah sat between Miguel and Rosa, Miguel's daughter, who worked as one of the ranch hands. Rosa was 25, tough as nails, and could rope a steer better than most men twice her age. She had grown up on the ranch alongside Sarah, and the two of them had a bond that went beyond friendship. Heard you went to see Bernard today, Rosa said quietly. Everything okay? Sarah glanced around to make sure others weren't listening. There's a loan. A big one. If this drought continues, we could be in trouble. Rosa's expression darkened. My father said Thornton people have been surveying near the eastern boundary, setting up equipment, taking readings. What kind of readings? Water surveys, geological testing. Rosa lowered her voice even more. Sarah, I think they know something we don't. Why else would they be so interested in this region right now, in the middle of the worst drought in decades? It was a good question, one that had been nagging at Sarah since the Thornton business card had appeared. Developers didn't usually target drought-stricken agricultural land. They wanted easy profits, subdivisions near growing cities, commercial properties with guaranteed returns. What was Thornton really after? I need to do some research, Sarah said. Find out everything we can about this company. Who owns it, what their other projects have been, what their real interest is here. I'll help, Rosa offered, and I'll keep my eyes open. If they're surveying our boundaries, someone around here must be helping them, someone local who knows the land. The next morning brought news that rippled through Redemption Springs like a stone thrown into still water. The Hendersons, who owned 8,000 acres to the south, had accepted Thornton's offer. They were selling their ranch and moving to Arizona to be near their grandchildren. Sarah heard about it at the feed store, where gossip traveled faster than wildfire. Old Pete Martinez, who had run the store for 40 years, shook his head as he rang up her order. That makes 3 ranches in 6 weeks. The Hendersons, the Bailey place, and now I hear the Morton family is considering it too. What are they offering? Sarah asked. Above market, from what I understand, enough to make struggling operations look twice. Pete leaned on the counter. Drought's got everyone scared. When you're watching your herd thin out and your water wells run dry, a cash offer starts looking pretty good. Sarah loaded the feed into the truck bed, her mind working through the implications. If Thornton was buying up multiple properties, they were planning something significant. The question was, she drove past the Webb Ranch on her way home, unable to resist the impulse to see what was happening. Sure enough, several Thornton vehicles were parked near the main house. She slowed down, studying the scene. Men in clean shirts and hard hats walked the property with surveying equipment. One of them pointed toward the hills where she knew a natural spring fed into Webb's water system. A figure emerged from the house. Clayton Webb was in his early 70s, tall and lean with a face carved by sun and wind into permanent hardness. He had never been friendly to the Hollisters, and the feeling was mutual. He saw Sarah's truck, and his expression soured further. He raised his hand in a gesture that was more dismissive than greeting. Sarah drove on, but the image stayed with her. Whatever was happening between Webb and Thornton, it was moving forward. And if Bernard was right about the interconnected water table, it could affect everyone in the region. Back at the ranch, she found Jack in his office, a room in the main house that had served as the command center for ranch operations for 4 generations. The walls were lined with filing cabinets and bookshelves holding everything from veterinary manuals to geological surveys. A large map of the property hung behind the desk, marked with different colored pins indicating wells, pastures, and boundary lines. Jack sat at the desk that had belonged to his father, going through a stack of papers with reading glasses perched on his nose. He looked up as Sarah entered. "Henderson sold," she said. Jack nodded slowly. "I heard. Good people. I hate to see them go." Sarah settled into the chair across from him. "Dad, we need to understand what Thornton is really after. This isn't normal developer behavior. They're targeting specific properties, paying premium prices in the middle of a drought. It doesn't make business sense unless they know something we don't." "Like what?" "I don't know, but I want to find out." She pulled out her phone and opened a folder of screenshots. "I've been researching Thornton Development. They're a subsidiary of a larger investment group based in Houston. Their previous projects have all been commercial, shopping centers, office parks, residential developments near major cities. Nothing like this." Jack leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. "So why are they suddenly interested in West Texas ranch land during a drought? That's what I need to figure out." Sarah stood and moved to the map on the wall. "Look at the properties they've bought or are negotiating for. Henderson's Place, the Bailey Ranch, and if they get Webb's property, they form a pattern." She traced her finger across the map, connecting the properties. They created a rough arc across the southern part of the county. They're buying land along the same geological formation. This ridge that runs from Webb's place down through Henderson's property. Jack stood and joined her at the map, studying it with fresh eyes. "Your mother used to say I was blind to what was right in front of me. What are we looking at, Sarah?" "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out." The drought map arrived from the county extension office 3 days later, rolled in a cardboard tube and marked with red zones, showing the crisis spreading across West Texas. Sarah spread it across the dining room table, weighing down the corners with coffee cups and salt shakers. The red zones covered nearly 70% of the region, with the darkest shading indicating areas of severe water stress. Jack stood beside her, arms crossed, studying the map with the same intensity he might use to examine a sick animal. Miguel joined them, still wearing his work gloves, dust from the morning's chores coating his boots. "It's worse than I thought," Miguel said quietly. "The whole county is suffering." Sarah pulled out her laptop and opened a document. "I've been tracking rainfall data, well levels, and livestock reports from across the region. We're in month 18 of below-average precipitation. The aquifer levels are dropping at rates we've never seen before." "How bad?" Jack asked. "If this continues for another year, some of the smaller ranches won't have enough water to sustain their herds. They'll have to sell off cattle at a loss or truck in water at costs that will bankrupt them." Sarah pointed to specific areas on the map: the Peterson place, the Morris Ranch, even parts of Webb's property. They're all showing signs of critical water shortage. Jack moved to the window, looking out over his own land. The grass that should have been green and lush was brown and brittle. The stock tanks that normally overflowed were half full at best. Even the trees seemed to droop, conserving every drop of moisture they could find. "We need to call an emergency meeting," Jack said finally. "The Ranchers Association, everyone needs to understand what we're facing." The meeting was scheduled for the following Saturday at the community center in Redemption Springs. It was a plain building with folding chairs and fluorescent lights, but it had hosted every important community gathering for the past 30 years. By 7 o'clock, nearly 50 ranchers had gathered, along with representatives from the bank, the county agricultural extension, and the local water authority. Jack stood at the front of the room, feeling the weight of expectation. These were his neighbors, people he had known for decades. They had helped each other through previous droughts, shared equipment, loaned money when times were tight. But this felt different. This felt like something that might break the bonds that held them together. "Thank you all for coming," Jack began. "I know everyone's busy, especially now, but we need to talk about what's happening to our land, to our water, and to our future." He gestured to Sarah, who had prepared a presentation. She clicked through slides showing rainfall data, well measurements, and projections for the coming year. The numbers painted a grim picture. Without significant rainfall in the next 6 months, the situation would become critical. "The question we need to ask ourselves," Jack continued, "is how we respond to this crisis. Do we face it alone, each of us trying to survive independently, or do we work together?" Clayton Webb stood up from his seat near the back. He had come, though Jack had half expected him to stay away. Webb's face was hard, his voice carrying an edge. "Easy for you to say, Hollister. Your operation is 3 times the size of most of ours. You've got deep pockets and oil revenue. Some of us are barely hanging on." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Jack felt the tension in the room shift. "I'm not pretending to have all the answers, Clayton. I'm just saying we're stronger together than apart." "Are we?" Webb challenged. "Because from where I sit, it looks like every man for himself, and some of us have gotten offers that could mean the difference between losing everything and starting over somewhere else." The room went quiet. Everyone knew he was talking about Thornton Development. "Those offers come with strings," Sarah said, stepping forward. "Thornton isn't buying land out of charity. They're targeting specific properties for reasons they haven't disclosed. Don't you think we should know what those reasons are before we start selling off our heritage?" Webb's jaw tightened. "Heritage doesn't pay the bills, Sarah. And forgive me if I don't take business advice from someone who was handed everything on a silver platter." The words hung in the air like poison. Jack felt his hands curl into fists at his sides, but Sarah touched his arm gently, staying him. She kept her voice steady, refusing to take the bait. "I wasn't handed anything, Mr. Webb. I've worked this land for 20 years. I've earned my place here, same as anyone else in this room." An older woman in the third row stood up, Martha Peterson, whose family had ranched in the area since the 1920s. "Sarah's right. We need to know what we're dealing with before we make decisions we can't undo. Has anyone actually read the contracts Thornton is offering? Several people shifted uncomfortably. Another rancher, Tom Bailey, raised his hand. I looked at it before I signed. Standard sale agreement, fair price, no obvious red flags. But what are they planning to do with the land? Sarah pressed. That's not in the contract, is it? Tom shook his head. They said it was for future development. Didn't specify what kind. A man in an expensive suit stood up near the back. He had been sitting quietly, but now he commanded the room's attention. My name is David Chen. I'm a regional director for Thornton Development Corporation. Perhaps I can clarify a few things. Jack hadn't noticed him arrive. The man moved to the front of the room with the easy confidence of someone used to being in control. He was in his 40s, well-groomed, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eye. First, let me say that Thornton respects the heritage and history of this region. We're not here to destroy what you've built. We're here to offer options to families who are struggling with circumstances beyond their control. Chen gestured to the drought map still displayed on the screen. This crisis isn't going away. Climate models suggest conditions may worsen over the next decade. We're offering fair market value, often above market value, to help families transition before they're forced into bankruptcy or foreclosure. That doesn't answer the question, Sarah said. What are you planning to do with the land? Chen's smile remained fixed. Our plans are still in development, but I can assure you they will benefit the entire community. Jobs, infrastructure improvements, economic development for a region that frankly needs it. You're avoiding the question, Jack said, his voice cutting through the corporate smooth talk. What specifically are you developing? I'm not at liberty to disclose details until we've secured the necessary properties and permit. I'm sure you understand that business requires a certain level of confidentiality. Chen pulled out a stack of folders from his briefcase. But I do have information packets for anyone interested in learning more about our offers. We're extending the opportunity to several additional properties in the area. He set the folders on a table near the door. Several ranchers moved toward them immediately, drawn by desperation or curiosity. Jack watched them go with a sinking feeling in his chest. The meeting broke up shortly after, fragmenting into smaller conversations. Some ranchers clustered around Chen, asking questions about timelines and terms. Others gathered near Jack and Sarah, clearly wanting to resist, but unsure how. Miguel appeared at Jack's elbow. We've got a problem. I just got a call from Danny at the North Pasture. Someone cut the fence again. Third time this month. Could it be coyotes? Jack asked, though he already knew the answer. Wire cutters, boss. Clean cuts. And there's more. The water troughs in Section 12 were tampered with. Someone poured something in them. The cattle won't drink from them now. Sarah's face went pale. Sabotage. Looks that way. Jack felt a cold anger settle in his gut. Vandalism was one thing, but poisoning water sources crossed a line. That could kill cattle, could devastate their operation. Did you call the sheriff? On his way. But boss, whoever's doing this knows the property. They know where the cameras aren't, where the hands won't be checking. This feels insane. Sarah lay awake that night in her bedroom on the second floor of the main house, staring at the ceiling and listening to the old building settle around her. The room had been hers for 20 years, decorated with the accumulated treasures of a life well lived. Horse show ribbons from her teenage years, photographs of the ranch through different seasons, a bookshelf filled with everything from agricultural journals to worn paperback novels. On her nightstand sat a small wooden box that she rarely opened but never put away. Inside was a child's diary, its pages filled with the careful handwriting of an 8-year-old girl trying to make sense of a world that had shown her mostly cruelty. She reached for it now, opening to a random page near the beginning. The date read 20 years ago, just days after she had arrived at the ranch. The man who is supposed to be my new father showed me the horses today. He didn't make me talk. He just let me stand there and watch them. One came up to the fence and ate an apple from my hand. Her nose was soft. Mr. Hollister said her name is Duchess and that she's gentle. He said I could visit her whenever I wanted. Nobody has ever let me do anything I wanted before. Sarah closed the diary, feeling the familiar ache in her chest. She had been so damaged back then, so convinced that she was fundamentally unlovable. The other families at the orphanage had made that clear enough. They wanted pretty children who smiled easily, who would slot into their lives without complications. They wanted instant gratification, not the hard work of healing a traumatized soul. But Jack had wanted exactly that. The hard work, the patience required to earn trust from someone who had learned that trust only led to disappointment. She remembered those early months with painful clarity. How she would wake up screaming from nightmares about the car accident that killed her parents, how she would flinch when Jack moved too quickly. How she tested him constantly, breaking rules and pushing boundaries to see when he would give up and send her back. He never did. No matter how difficult she made it, he stayed steady, present, patient. The first time she had called him Dad, she had been 10 years old. They were fixing a fence together, working in comfortable silence the way they often did. She had handed him a tool and said, "Here you go, Dad," without thinking. The word had just slipped out, natural as breath. Jack had frozen, the tool halfway to his hand. Then he had cleared his throat, nodded once, and gone back to work. But she had seen the moisture in his eyes, the way his hands trembled slightly as he worked the wire cutters. That night at dinner, he had signed the papers to formally adopt her. No fanfare, no big ceremony, just the two of them at the dining room table with Bernard as witness, making permanent what had already become true in their hearts. A sound from downstairs pulled Sarah from her memories. She sat up, listening, footsteps in the hall, slow and deliberate. Jack was awake too, probably unable to sleep with everything pressing down on them. She pulled on a robe and went downstairs, finding him in his office. He sat at the desk, with a tumbler of whiskey, staring at the map on the wall. The desk lamp cast shadows across his face, making him look older and more worn than she liked to see. "Can't sleep either?" she sheshed from the doorway. Jack looked up, offering a tired smile. "Too much on my mind." Sarah entered and settled into the leather chair across from him. "The sabotage has you worried. That and everything else. The drought, the loan. Thornton, circling like buzzards." He took a sip of whiskey. "I keep thinking about my father. What he would do in this situation. What would he do? Fight. He never backed down from anything, believed that a Hollister's word was his bond, and that the land was sacred trust." Jack touched the pocket watch on his desk, the one that had belonged to his father. But he also believed in knowing when you were beaten. He sold off parcels twice during hard times. Strategic retreats, he called them. Gave up ground to save the whole. "Are you thinking about selling?" Sarah asked carefully. "I'm thinking about options. About what happens if this drought continues for another 2 years. About whether pride is worth losing everything." "We're not losing anything," Sarah said firmly. "We're going to figure this out." Jack studied her face, seeing the determination there. "You sound so certain." "Because I am. This ranch saved my life, Dad. Literally saved it. I'm not going to let it slip away without a fight." She leaned forward. "There's something Thornton isn't telling us. Why are they so interested in this specific area? What do they know that we don't? What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking I need to do some digging, real research, geological surveys, water table studies, historical land records. There's an answer here somewhere." Sarah stood. "And I'm going to find it." The next morning brought another problem. Miguel found Sarah in the barn at dawn, his expression grim. "We've got cattle missing, 20 head from the east pasture. Gates were opened sometime during the night." Sarah felt her stomach clench. 20 head represented significant money, but more than that, it was another escalation. Whoever was behind the sabotage was getting bolder. "Tracks?" she asked. "Trucked tires, professional job. They knew what they were doing." Miguel handed her his phone, showing photos of the gate. No forced entry. Someone had a key, or knew how to pick the lock. Sarah studied the images. The implications were clear and troubling. How many people have access to those gates? All the ranch hands, plus the regular suppliers and contractors. Maybe 30 people total. Miguel's face darkened. But it's not just about access. It's about knowledge. Whoever did this knew which pasture held the prime breeding stock. They knew when the night patrol would be on the other side of the property. They knew exactly how to hurt us. Sarah spent the rest of the morning filing a police report and reviewing security footage. The cameras had been mysteriously offline during the critical hours, another sign of inside knowledge. She made a list of everyone with access to the system, her mind working through possibilities she didn't want to consider. Around noon, a familiar truck pulled into the driveway. Sarah's heart did a small flip that she tried to ignore. Daniel Martinez climbed out, carrying a rolled set of plans under his arm. He was 30, tall and lean, with an easy smile and dark eyes that had always seen more than she was comfortable with. Daniel had grown up in Redemption Springs, the son of Pete Martinez, who owned the feed store. He and Sarah had been friends since childhood, riding horses together, getting into trouble together, sharing dreams under the stars. He had gone off to college to study civil engineering, while she stayed to help run the ranch. When he returned 5 years ago to start his own surveying business, something between them had shifted into territory neither had been brave enough to explore. "Heard you needed some geological surveys," Daniel said, his smile warm despite the tension evident in her posture. "Word travels fast. Small town. Plus my dad told me you were asking questions about land formations and water tables." He set the plans on the hood of his truck. "I pulled everything I could find. County records, geological surveys from the 1970s, even some old prospecting reports from when they were looking for oil." Sarah unrolled the first map, her eyes scanning the technical details. "What am I looking at?" "This is a cross-section of the geological strata beneath this region. See this layer?" He pointed to a blue line running through the diagram. "That's an aquifer, a big one. It runs from the hills west of Webb's property down through your land and continues east toward town." "How big?" "Hard to say without modern testing, but based on these old surveys, it could be massive. Millions of gallons, maybe tens of millions." Daniel pulled out another map, this one showing property boundaries overlaid with geological features. "Here's the interesting part. Most of the ranches around here have wells that tap into the surface water table, but this aquifer is deeper, protected by a layer of shale. It wouldn't be affected by the drought, the same way the shallow wells are." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "So whoever controls access to this aquifer would have water even during the worst drought." "Exactly. And in a region facing long-term water shortage, that's worth a fortune." Daniel traced the aquifer's path with his finger. "Look at the properties Thornton has been buying. They're all along this geological formation. They're assembling control over the entire aquifer." Sarah pulled out her phone and opened her notes, comparing Daniel's map to the list of properties Thornton had purchased or made offers on. The pattern was unmistakable. Every single property sat directly above the underground water source. "They know about this," she said. "They've known all along. That's why they're willing to pay premium prices during a drought. They're not buying ranch land. They're buying water rights," which would explain why they've been so secretive about their plans. Daniel rolled up the maps. "Sarah, if they control this aquifer, they could sell water to every ranch in the region, or worse, deny access and force everyone else out." The implications were staggering. Water was more valuable than oil in a drought. Control over a resource like this could make someone millions, maybe tens of millions, and it would give them power over everyone who depended on that water to survive. "I need to tell my father," Sarah said, "and we need to figure out exactly where our property sits in relation to this aquifer." "Already did that." Daniel pulled out another map, this one marked with colored zones. "Your ranch sits right on top of the primary recharge zone. That's the area where water enters the aquifer, naturally. If someone wanted to control the entire system, They'd need your land. Without it, they only have partial access. Sarah felt the pieces clicking into place. That's why Thornton wanted the Hollister Ranch so badly. It wasn't just another property. It was the key to the entire operation. "Does Clayton Webb know about this?" she asked. Daniel's expression darkened. "I did some surveying work for Webb 6 months ago. Nothing related to this. Just boundary line verification. But while I was there, I saw other surveyors, professional outfit, expensive equipment. They were doing geological testing near his springs. Was it Thornton's people? They didn't say, but I'd bet money on it. Webb knows something. Whether he understands the full picture, I can't say, but he's been meeting with them regularly." Sarah's mind raced through scenarios. If Webb sold his water rights to Thornton, they would control a significant portion of the aquifer. Combined with the properties they had already purchased, they would have enough leverage to dominate water access across the entire region. The only thing standing in their way was the Hollister Ranch. "We need to test our wells," Sarah said. "Find out if we're already tapped into this aquifer, or if we're still relying on surface water. I can arrange that. I know a hydrologist who can run the tests." Daniel hesitated, then reached out and touched her arm gently. "Sarah, be careful. If Thornton is behind the sabotage and they realize you're onto them, things could get dangerous." She met his eyes, seeing genuine concern there. "I can handle it. I know you can, but you don't have to handle it alone." His hand lingered on her arm for a moment longer before he pulled away. "Call me when you're ready to run those tests. And Sarah, watch who you trust. If someone inside the ranch is feeding information to Thornton, you need to figure out who it is before they do more damage." After Daniel left, Sarah sat in her truck, staring at the maps spread across the passenger seat. Everything suddenly made terrible sense. The strategic property purchases, the secrecy, the pressure on struggling ranches, even the sabotage. It was all about water, about control, about power in a region where water would soon be more precious than gold. She thought about the stolen cattle, the poisoned troughs, the cut fences. Someone wanted the Hollister Ranch destabilized, wanted them desperate enough to sell. The question was who? Was it just Thornton's people, or was someone closer involved? Someone who knew the ranch operations intimately enough to strike where it would hurt most. Sarah started the truck and headed back to the main house. Jack needed to hear this. They needed to make plans, shore up security, and figure out their next move. But more than anything, they needed to protect what they had, because now she understood what was really at stake. This wasn't just about saving a ranch anymore. It was about preventing one corporation from controlling the water supply for an entire region. Jack was in the barn when Sarah found him, brushing down Duchess with slow, methodical stroke. The mare was 28 years old now, grey around the muzzle, moving with the careful dignity of age. Jack had bought her the year before he adopted Sarah, and the horse had become a bridge between them in those early difficult months when words were hard to find. "Dad, we need to talk." Sarah's voice was urgent, but controlled. Jack set down the brush, noting the tension in her shoulders. "What did you find?" She spread Daniel's maps on a hay bale, explaining everything. The aquifer, the geological formation, Thornton's strategy, the significance of the Hollister Ranch's location. Jack listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each revelation. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he walked to the barn door and looked out over his land, his hands resting on the weathered frame. "My father knew." "What?" Jack turned back to face her. "My father. He knew about the aquifer. He must have. That's what he meant in his letters, the ones he wrote before he died. He kept talking about protecting the spring, about water being more valuable than gold. I thought he was just being philosophical, but he knew." "Did he ever talk to you about it?" "Not directly, but there were things." Jack moved back to the maps, studying them with fresh understanding. He had geological surveys done in the early 70s, said he was looking for oil, but maybe that wasn't the whole story. And he fought with Clayton Webb's father about water rights. They were partners once. Did you know that, back in the 50s, they were going to develop a water distribution system together, share resources across both properties? What happened? They had a falling out. Bad enough that they never spoke again. Webb's father accused mine of trying to steal water that rightfully belonged to both families. My father said Webb wanted to exploit the resource for profit while he wanted to protect it for future generations. Jack shook his head. I always thought it was just old men being stubborn, but maybe it was about this aquifer all along. Sarah felt pieces of history clicking into place. Where are his papers, the surveys, the letters, anything he left behind? In his office. I boxed everything up after he died, put it in storage in the attic. Haven't looked at it in years. Jack met her eyes. You think there's something up there that could help us? I think if your father knew about this aquifer and was trying to protect it, he might have left information we need. Legal documents, water rights claims, geological data, anything that could prove the Hollister family has senior rights to this resource. They spent the afternoon in the attic, a dusty space under the eaves that held 4 generations of accumulated history. Sarah found the boxes marked with her grandfather's name, carrying them down to Jack's office, where they could examine the contents properly. The first box contained personal items, photographs, medals from his service in Korea, letters from Jack's mother. Sarah handled them carefully, aware she was touching pieces of family history that predated her own place in it. The second box held business records, ranch accounts, livestock inventories, sale receipts going back to the night, useful for understanding the ranch's history, but not what they were looking for. It was in the third box that Sarah found the letter. It was sealed in an envelope marked for Jack, to be opened only if the water becomes an issue. The paper was yellowed with age, the handwriting shaky but still legible. Dad, Sarah said softly, holding up the envelope. Jack took it with trembling hands. He stared at his father's handwriting for a long moment before carefully breaking the seal. Inside was a single page, dated 2 weeks before his father's death, 30 years ago. Jack read it aloud, his voice thick with emotion. Son, if you're reading this, then the water has become a problem like I always feared it would. There are things you need to know, things I should have told you years ago, but kept secret because I thought I was protecting you. Jack continued reading, his voice steady despite the emotion. Beneath our land lies an aquifer that could supply water to this entire region for generations. I discovered it in 1972 during oil surveys. The geologists told me it was one of the largest underground water sources in West Texas. When I showed Robert Webb the data, I thought we would work together to manage it responsibly. Instead, he wanted to sell access to the highest bidders, turn it into a commodity. We fought about it for months. Finally, I bought out his share of our partnership, and we went our separate ways. He never forgave me. Sarah leaned closer, reading over Jack's shoulder as he continued. I've spent the last 30 years quietly securing the legal rights to this water. It wasn't easy. The laws around groundwater in Texas are complicated, but I worked with lawyers and water authorities to establish our claim. In the desk, there's a false bottom in the left drawer. Inside, you'll find the documents that prove the Hollister family has senior water rights to the aquifer. Use them wisely, son. Water is life. Don't let greed destroy what we've protected. Jack set down the letter, his hands shaking slightly. He moved to the desk, the same one his father had used, and pulled out the left drawer completely. Sure enough, there was a thin panel that didn't quite match the others. He pressed on it carefully, and it popped loose, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a leather portfolio, still in good condition despite 3 decades of storage. Jack lifted it out with reverence, setting it on the desk. Sarah stood beside him as he opened it, revealing a stack of documents, maps and official certificates. The first document was a water rights deed dated 1978, signed by county officials and state water authority representatives. It granted the Hollister family primary access rights to the underground aquifer, with specific language about conservation and sustainable use. The legal language was dense, but the meaning was clear. Jack's father had secured legal claim to the water before anyone else even knew it existed. He did it, Sarah breathed. He protected the aquifer, legally. Jack shuffled through more documents, geological surveys showing the exact boundaries and capacity of the water source. Correspondence with state officials establishing the Hollister family's intent to preserve the resource for agricultural use. Legal opinions from 3 different law firms confirming the validity of the water rights. This changes everything, Jack said. If these documents hold up, Thornton can't control the aquifer even if they buy every other property in the region. We have senior rights. Sarah picked up one of the surveys, studying it closely. This shows the aquifer extends under Webb's property too, and the Henderson Place, and several others. Your father's claim covers water that flows beneath multiple ranches, which means we have legal authority over how that water is accessed and used. Jack sat down heavily in his chair, the weight of this revelation pressing on him. My father wasn't just protecting our ranch, he was protecting the entire community's water supply, and he never told you. He probably thought he had more time. He died suddenly, heart attack while working cattle. I was only 38. He likely figured he'd explain everything when I was older, when the time was right. Jack touched the letter gently. Instead, he left this, hoping I'd be smart enough to find it if I needed it. Sarah pulled out her phone. We need to get these documents to Bernd immediately. Have him verify their legal standing and figure out how to use them. Wait. Jack held up a hand. We need to think about this carefully. Once word gets out that we have senior water rights, Thornton will come at us hard. So will Webb, maybe others. This isn't just about money anymore, it's about power, control, the kind of thing people do terrible things to obtain. You think the sabotage will get worse? I think it's going to escalate in ways we can't predict. Jack stood and moved to the window, looking out at the land he loved. Sarah, I need to tell you something. I went to see Doc Harrison last week. He ran some tests. Sarah felt her stomach drop. Dad, what's wrong? My heart. The tests show I have arterial blockage. Significant blockage. Doc says I need surgery, maybe bypass, but I need to reduce stress first, or the risk is too high. Jack turned to face her, and Sarah saw fear in his eyes for the first time she could remember. He says, if I don't manage the stress, I could have a heart attack. A serious one. Sarah crossed the room and took his hands. Then we manage the stress. You step back. Let me handle more of the operations. We get you the surgery you need. Sarah, I can't step back now, not with everything happening. You don't have a choice. Her voice was firm, the same tone she used with stubborn cattle. I've been running most of the operations for the past 2 years anyway. Nothing changes except you actually admit it and rest like you're supposed to. Jack squeezed her hands. When did you become the parent in this relationship? About the same time you started being too stubborn for your own good. She managed a small smile despite her worry. We're going to figure this out, Dad. The water rights, the ranch, Thornton, all of it. But I need you alive to see it through. I'm not going anywhere. Promise me. Promise you'll follow the doctor's orders. Take your medication, reduce your workload, no more 18-hour days. I promise. Jack pulled her into a hug, holding her tight the way he had when she was 8 years old, and afraid of thunderstorms. You know I'm proud of you, right? Everything you've become, everything you've accomplished. Your mother would have loved you so much. Sarah felt tears sting her eyes but blinked them back. I wish I could have met her. she would have understood why I adopted you. She always said family isn't about blood, it's about who shows up, who stays. He released her and stepped back, wiping at his own eyes. Okay, enough sentiment. We've got work to do. Let's call Bernard and set up a meeting. But we keep this quiet for now. Just us, Bernard, and Miguel. We need to understand our legal position before we show our hand. That evening, Bernard arrived at the ranch after dark, parking behind the barn where his car wouldn't be visible from the road. Jack and Sarah met him in the office, spreading the documents across the desk. Bernard spent an hour examining every page, making notes and occasionally pulling out his phone to check legal references. Finally, he sat back, removed his glasses, and rubbed his eyes. This is extraordinary. Your father did meticulous work. These water rights are ironclad. Bernard tapped the deed. Under Texas law, landowners have the right to pump groundwater beneath their property, but your father went further. He got state certification that establishes the Hollister family as the primary rights holder for sustainable management of the aquifer. That means you don't just have access, you have authority over how the entire aquifer is managed and accessed. Can Thornton challenge it? Sarah asked. They can try, but they'd lose. The documentation is too thorough, and it's been legally established for nearly 50 years. Courts give significant weight to historical water rights, especially ones this well documented. Bernard leaned forward. But here's what you need to understand. This makes you incredibly powerful and incredibly vulnerable. If Thornton realizes you have these rights, they'll do everything they can to force you to sell. And I mean everything. They're already sabotaging our operations, Jack said. Bernard's expression darkened. Then it will get worse, much worse, because right now, the Hollister Ranch is the only thing standing between Thornton and complete control of the region's water supply. They've already invested millions buying up properties. If they can't get your land and your water rights, their entire plan collapses. So what do we do? Sarah asked. We have a few options. One, you could sell to them, name your price. With these water rights, you could ask for 50 million or more and they'd probably pay it. Not happening, Jack said flatly. I didn't think so. Two, you could go public with the water rights, hold a press conference, file the documents with the county, make sure everyone knows the Hollister family controls the aquifer. That would provide some protection through transparency. What's option 3? Sarah asked. You use the water rights to create a community cooperative, share access to the aquifer with neighboring ranches at fair rates, build a coalition strong enough that Thornton can't break it. Bernard pulled out a legal pad and started sketching. If you control the water and you're using it to help the entire community survive the drought, you become untouchable. Thornton can't fight you without fighting everyone. Sarah leaned forward, her mind racing through possibilities. A water cooperative. We provide access to the aquifer for agricultural use, charge enough to cover infrastructure and maintenance, but keep it affordable. Everyone survives the drought together. Exactly, and you maintain control over how the resource is managed. No exploitation, no selling off to developers, just sustainable use for the people who actually work this land. Bernard looked at Jack. It's what your father would have wanted, protection for the entire community, not just profit for the Hollister family. Jack was quiet, turning the idea over in his mind. Webb will never go for it. Maybe not, but if enough other ranchers sign on, he won't be able to stop it. And when his wells run dry and yours are still flowing, he might reconsider his position. Bernard gathered the documents. I'll need to take these, get copies made in a secure location. We should also file them officially with the county and state water authorities. Create a public record that can't be disputed or disappeared. How long will that take? Sarah asked. A week, maybe less if I push. But Sarah, Jack, you need to beef up security immediately. No more leaving gates unlocked. No more trusting people just because they've worked here for years. Someone inside is feeding information to Thornton. Until we know who, trust no one. After Bernard left, Sarah and Jack sat in silence. The weight of what they had learned pressed down on them. Finally, Miguel knocked softly on the door. They had called him in for a private conversation. "Boss, Sarah, what's going on?" Miguel's weathered face showed concern. Jack gestured to a chair. "Sit down, old friend. We need to talk, and I need your absolute discretion." They explained everything: the aquifer, the water rights, Jack's father's hidden legacy, and their plan for a community cooperative. Miguel listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious with each revelation. "So that's why they want the ranch so badly," Miguel said finally. "And that's why someone's been sabotaging us. They're trying to weaken you enough that you'll have to sell." "That's our theory," Sarah confirmed. "Which brings us to a hard question. Miguel, you know everyone who works here. You've known most of them for years. Can you think of anyone who might be working with Thornton? Anyone acting suspicious or asking unusual questions?" Miguel was quiet for a long moment, clearly troubled by the implications. "I hate to say it, but there's been some things that didn't sit right." Tommy Briggs, one of the younger hands, he's been asking a lot of questions about where we keep supplies, when the patrol schedules are, which pastures hold which cattle. I thought he was just being thorough, learning the operation. "Anything else?" Jack asked. "He's been spending money he shouldn't have. New truck, new boots, eating at the steakhouse in town. Ranch hand wages don't cover that kind of lifestyle." Miguel's jaw tightened. "I vouched for him when we hired him 2 years ago. His uncle works the Henderson place. If he's betraying us, that's on me." "It's not on you," Sarah said firmly, "but we need to handle this carefully. If Tommy is feeding information to Thornton, we can use that. Feed him false information, see where it goes." Jack nodded. "Miguel, I need you to do something. Tell Tommy we're considering Thornton's offer, that I'm having health problems, and Sarah's worried about taking on the full burden of the ranch. Make it convincing. You want him to report back that you're weakening." "Exactly. Let them think they're winning. Meanwhile, we secure the water rights, build our coalition, and prepare for the real fight." Jack stood and clasped Miguel's shoulder. "I trust you like a brother. You know that." "I know, boss, and I won't let you down." Miguel met his eyes. "We're going to beat them, whatever it takes." 3 days later, Sarah found herself in her father's office well past midnight, unable to sleep. The desk lamp cast a warm glow over the papers scattered across the surface. She had been going through her grandfather's documents again, looking for anything they might have missed. The desk itself was a massive piece of furniture, solid oak, built sometime in the 1920s. Her grandfather had used it, and his father before him. Sarah ran her hand along the edge, feeling the grain of the wood, the small imperfections that came with age and use. She opened the left drawer again, the one that had held the hidden compartment. Empty now, with Bernard safely storing the water rights documents. But something caught her eye, the way the wood grain didn't quite match at the very back of the drawer. She pulled it all the way out, setting it on the floor, and peered into the opening. There, tucked against the back wall of the desk frame, was another compartment, smaller than the first, easy to miss unless you were looking for it. Sarah's heart raced as she reached in, her fingers finding the edge of what felt like paper. She carefully extracted a folded document, yellowed and brittle with age. It was a deed, but not the water rights deed Bernard now had. This was older, dated 1882, written in elaborate script that was difficult to read in the dim light. Sarah carried it to the desk lamp, studying it carefully. The document was a land grant, one of the original deeds issued when Texas was parceling out territory to settlers. It established the Hollister family claim to their original 200 acres, signed by a territorial judge and sealed with red wax that had cracked but remained intact. But it was the third paragraph that made Sarah's breath catch. Written in formal legal language of the era, it granted the Hollister family rights in perpetuity to all water sources, surface and subterranean, originating within or passing through the granted territory, with priority above all subsequent claims. Sarah read it 3 times, making sure she understood. This wasn't just about the aquifer her grandfather had discovered in 1972. This was a blanket water rights claim that dated back to the original settlement. It meant the Hollister family had legal claim to the water that predated every other ranch in the region by decades, maybe a century or more. She grabbed her phone and called Bernard, not caring that it was 1 in the morning. "This better be important," Bernard answered, his voice groggy. "I found another deed, from 1882. It grants the Hollister family priority water rights to everything on or under the original property." Sarah's words tumbled out rapidly. "Bernard, this changes everything. This isn't just about the aquifer, this is about all water rights in the entire region." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then, "Don't touch that document, don't even breathe on it. I'm coming over right now." Bernard arrived 20 minutes later, still wearing his pajama shirt tucked into hastily pulled-on pants. He examined the deed under a magnifying glass, his hands trembling slightly as he held the fragile paper. "Do you understand what this is?" he asked quietly. "I think so, but I want you to tell me." "This is a senior water rights claim that supersedes every other claim in the county. Under Texas water law, historical rights carry tremendous weight. If this document is authentic, and I believe it is, the Hollister family doesn't just control the aquifer. You have legal authority over water allocation for every property whose water originates on or passes through your land." Bernard set down the magnifying glass. "Sarah, this includes the spring that feeds Clayton Webb's property, and the creek that runs through the Henderson place, and at least a dozen other ranches." Sarah felt the room tilt slightly. "That's not possible." "It's not just possible. It's documented right here in 19th century legal language. Your great-great-grandfather was smarter than anyone realized. He didn't just claim land, he claimed the water that would become the most valuable resource in the region. But we've never enforced these rights. Other families have been using that water for over 100 years, which is probably why no one challenged it. The Hollister family was generous, allowed neighbors to access water freely, never restricted use. It became an informal arrangement that everyone accepted." Bernard carefully placed the deed in a protective folder. "But legally, those rights still exist. They were never surrendered or signed away. They're just dormant. What happens if we activate them?" Bernard met her eyes seriously. "You would have the legal authority to control water access for a significant portion of this county. You could grant access, deny access, set terms and rates. You would essentially become the water authority for the region." Sarah sat down heavily. "That's not what I want. That's not what any of this is about. I know, but Thornton doesn't know that. And neither does Clayton Webb." Bernard pulled out his phone and started making notes. "Sarah, this changes our entire strategy. With both deeds, you have legal grounds to block Thornton completely. They can buy every other property in the county, and it won't matter. Without your cooperation, they can't access the water. So we have leverage. You have more than leverage. You have total control. The question is what you do with it." Bernard looked at her thoughtfully. "Your grandfather kept this deed hidden for a reason. He could have used these rights to dominate the region, become wealthy beyond measure. Instead, he let neighbors use the water freely. He chose community over profit." Sarah thought about the letter her grandfather had left for Jack, about protecting the spring, about water being life. He had understood that some things were more valuable than money. Some responsibilities were too important to exploit. "We use it the same way," Sarah said. "We don't exploit the power. We use it to protect." "The cooperative," Bernard suggested. "We make it official, legally binding. Everyone gets access to the water they need at fair rates. No one gets shut out. No one gets gouged. And Thornton gets nothing, because we're using the water for its intended purpose. Sustaining the families who actually work this land." Bernard smiled. "Your grandfather would be proud. So would your father. Don't tell him yet. Not tonight. He needs rest, and this will just wind him up." Sarah glanced at the clock. We'll tell him in the morning, along with Miguel and Rosa. Then we start reaching out to the neighboring ranches. Build the coalition before Thornton realizes what we're doing." After Bernard left, Sarah remained in the office, holding the ancient deed carefully. She thought about the man who had written his name on this document over 140 years ago. He had traveled to Texas with nothing but determination and a dream. He had claimed this land, built a home, raised a family, and he had been wise enough to secure the one resource that would matter most to future generations. She thought about her grandfather, discovering the aquifer, and spending years quietly protecting it. About her father, carrying on that legacy, without even knowing its full scope, and now it fell to her, an orphan nobody wanted, carrying the responsibility for an entire community's survival. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had come to this ranch as an unwanted child, damaged and afraid. The Hollister family had given her a home, a name, a purpose, and now she had the chance to protect that family's legacy, while helping others, the way she had been helped. Sarah carefully placed the deed in the office safe, spinning the lock. Tomorrow would bring challenges, difficult conversations, probably conflict. But tonight, for just a moment, she allowed herself to feel the weight and the wonder of what they had discovered. A knock on the door startled her. Jack stood in the doorway wearing his robe and slippers. Saw the light on. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. Sarah hesitated, then decided he deserved to know. She told him about the 1882 deed, watching his face move through shock, understanding, and finally a kind of awed respect. "My grandfather," Jack said softly. "He protected us even from beyond the grave, multiple generations beyond. He protected everyone, the whole community. He just trusted us to figure out how to use that protection wisely." Jack crossed the room and pulled Sarah into a hug. "You already have. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. Your quick thinking, your determination to do right by everyone. That's not something I taught you. That's who you are." The manila envelope arrived 3 days later, left on the porch of the main house in the pre-dawn hours. Rosa found it when she came in for the morning meeting, the ranch's name scrawled across the front in block letters. Inside was a contract, unsigned but detailed. An offer from Thornton Development Corporation for the purchase of the Hollister Ranch. $25 million, all cash, 30-day close. Clipped to the contract was a handwritten note on expensive stationery. "Final offer. Accept by Friday or face consequences. Your choice." Sarah stared at the note, her jaw tight. Jack read over her shoulder, his face darkening with anger. "Consequences," Jack said flatly. "They're threatening us now." Miguel held the envelope up to the light. No postmark. Hand-delivered. Someone came right up to the house in the middle of the night. "Getting bolder," Rosa added. "They're not even trying to hide anymore." Sarah pulled out her phone and took photos of both the contract and the note. "This is evidence of intimidation. We should show the sheriff." "Sheriff can't do much about a business offer," Jack said, though his tone suggested he agreed with the sentiment. "But we keep it documented. Everything they do, we document." The morning brought more problems. 2 water pumps failed simultaneously in different pastures. Not mechanical failure, sabotage. Someone had poured sand into the motors, destroying them beyond repair. The cost to replace them was $15,000, money the ranch could afford, but didn't want to spend. Then the feed supplier called. Their next delivery would be delayed 2 weeks due to supply chain issues that Sarah suspected weren't entirely coincidental. When she pressed for details, the supplier became evasive, finally admitting that Thornton had offered to buy out their entire inventory at above-market rates. "They're trying to starve us out," Sarah said at the emergency meeting that afternoon. Jack, Miguel, Rosa, Bernard, and Daniel Martinez sat around the dining room table, the unsigned contract in the center, like a coiled snake. "It's economic warfare," Bernard agreed. make operations so expensive and difficult that selling becomes the logical choice. Daniel had brought updated geological surveys. I've been doing some digging into Thornton's other projects. They have a pattern. They identify valuable resources, buy up surrounding properties, then consolidate control. In Colorado, it was mineral rights. In New Mexico, it was natural gas. Here, it's water. What happened in those other places? Jack asked. Small operators got squeezed out. Property values collapsed for anyone who didn't sell to Thornton. They used legal pressure, economic pressure, and in a few cases there were allegations of harassment and intimidation that were never proven. So we're not the first people they've gone after like this, Sarah said. Not even close, but you might be the first with enough legal grounds to actually stop them. Daniel pointed to the water rights documents Bernard had brought. These deeds are your shield. Thornton can't touch the water without going through you, and Texas courts are very protective of historical water rights. Jack stood and walked to the window, looking out at the land he loved. His chest felt tight, the stress making his heart work harder than it should. He touched his chest absently, trying to will away the discomfort. Sarah noticed immediately. "Dad, sit down. You need to rest." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. Your face is pale and you're short of breath." Sarah stood and guided him back to his chair. "Miguel, get his medication. Rosa, call Doc Harrison." "I said I'm fine," Jack protested, but his voice was weak. "And I say you're not." Sarah knelt beside his chair, taking his hand. "You promised me you'd take care of yourself. That means listening when your body tells you to slow down." Doc Harrison arrived within 30 minutes, a testament to how seriously he took Jack's condition. After a quick examination, he pulled Sarah aside while Jack rested on the couch. "His blood pressure is elevated, heart rate irregular. He's under too much stress." The doctor's expression was grave. "Sarah, I'm telling you this as plainly as I can. If something doesn't change soon, your father is going to have a major cardiac event, possibly fatal." Sarah felt the world narrow to a single point. How soon? Could be days, could be hours if he has another spike like today. Doc Harrison squeezed her shoulder. "I know what's happening with Thornton. Whole town knows. But Sarah, no ranch is worth your father's life. You need to get him out of this situation or it's going to kill him." After the doctor left, Sarah stood on the porch, her mind racing. Everything was accelerating too fast. The threats, the sabotage, her father's health. They needed time, but time was the one thing they didn't have. Daniel found her there as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. He leaned against the railing beside her, not speaking, just offering his presence. "I don't know what to do," Sarah said finally. "If I push forward with the water rights, with the cooperative, it's going to get worse before it gets better. The stress will kill him. But if I back down, we lose everything he's worked for, everything his father and grandfather protected." What does Jack want? He wants to fight, but he's not thinking clearly. He's thinking with pride and stubbornness instead of reality. Sarah turned to face Daniel. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Always. The work you did for Clayton Webb, did you see anything that suggested he's working directly with Thornton, beyond just considering their offers?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I saw survey equipment from a company called Western Water Solutions. It's a Thornton subsidiary. They were doing extensive geological testing on Webb's property, mapping the entire water system, and Webb was cooperating fully, giving them access to everything. So he's already sold them the water rights, or he's planning to." "That would be my guess." "Sarah, there's something else. When I was there, I overheard part of a conversation. Webb was talking to David Chen, the Thornton guy. Webb said something about the Hollisters not knowing what they really had. Chen told him to be patient, that once Jack's health forced him to sell, everything would fall into place." Sarah felt cold fury settle in her stomach, They know about his heart condition. Someone told them. Looks that way. And they're counting on it to break your resistance. She thought about Tommy Briggs, the ranch hand they suspected of feeding information to Thornton. He would have heard talk about Jack's doctor visits, might have overheard conversations about medication and stress. It all fit together in an ugly picture. I need to move faster than they expect, Sarah said. Get ahead of them instead of just reacting. What are you thinking? The water cooperative. We go public with it tomorrow. Call a town meeting, present the plan, get ranchers to sign on before Thornton can counter. Take away their leverage by making the community choose sides openly. Daniel nodded slowly. Bold move, but risky. Once you show that hand, Thornton will know about the water rights. They'll come at you with everything. They're already coming at us with everything. At least this way we're on offense instead of defense. Sarah pulled out her phone and started making calls. Can you help me set it up? We'll need the community center. Need to contact every rancher in the county. Need to have the legal documents ready to sign. I'll help with whatever you need. You know that. She paused in her dialing and looked at him. Really looked at him for the first time in days. Daniel had been there through all of this, offering support without expecting anything in return. The same way he had been there through their entire lives, a constant presence she had taken for granted too often. Why are you doing this? She asked. Helping us. You could stay neutral, protect your business relationships. Daniel stepped closer. Because it's the right thing to do, and because I care about you. I always have, Sarah. Since we were kids riding horses and planning to run away to rodeo together. You had to know that. I knew. I just didn't want to complicate things. Everything's already complicated. Might as well be honest about it. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. When this is over, when we've beaten Thornton and saved the ranch and your father is healthy again, I'm taking you to dinner. A real date, not just friends grabbing food in town. Sarah managed a small smile despite everything. Deal, but I'm ordering the most expensive steak on the menu. Worth every penny. The town meeting was scheduled for 7 o'clock the next evening. By noon, word had spread throughout Redemption Springs and the surrounding ranches. Bernard worked with Sarah to prepare the legal framework for the cooperative, drafting agreements that would protect everyone's interests while maintaining the Hollister family's senior water rights. Jack insisted on being there despite Sarah's protest. This is my family's legacy, he said firmly. I'm not hiding while you fight this battle alone. You're not hiding, you're recovering. I'll recover after we win. He took his medication and put on his best Western shirt, the one he wore to important occasions. Besides, these ranchers need to see that I'm still standing, that we're not beaten. By 6:30, the community center was packed. Every rancher in the county seemed to have shown up, along with townspeople, business owners, and even a reporter from the regional newspaper. The air was thick with tension and the smell of coffee from the refreshment table someone had set up. Clayton Webb sat in the front row, with David Chen beside him. Webb's son Michael was there too, a man in his 30s who worked as a consultant for Thornton. Sarah had always known the Webb family held grudges, but seeing them aligned so openly with Thornton crystallized the depth of the divide. Sarah stood at the front with Bernard, Jack seated nearby, looking pale but determined. Miguel and Rosa flanked him protectively, ready to help if his health faltered. At exactly 7 o'clock, Sarah called the meeting to order. The room fell silent, every eye fixed on her. Thank you all for coming. I know everyone's busy, especially during these difficult times, but what we discuss tonight will affect every family in this room and every family in this county for generations to come. Sarah took a deep breath, steadying herself. Most of you know about the drought. You're living it every day. You know about Thornton development, making offers to buy ranches. Some of you have already sold, others are considering it. And I understand why. When you're watching your operation fail and someone offers you a lifeline, it's hard to say no. Several ranchers nodded, looking uncomfortable, but understanding. But I'm here tonight to tell you that Thornton isn't offering a lifeline. They're offering a trap, and I can prove it. Sarah nodded to Bernard, who began distributing copies of documents to the crowd. What you're looking at is geological survey data showing an underground aquifer beneath this region, a massive water source that wouldn't be affected by surface drought. Thornton has known about this aquifer for at least a year. That's why they're buying ranches. Murmurs spread through the crowd. People leaned over to study the surveys, pointing at maps and asking neighbors questions. Clayton Webb stood up, his face red with anger. This is ridiculous. You're making accusations without proof. The proof is in your hands, Mr. Webb. Geological surveys that Thornton's subsidiary company conducted on your property 6 months ago, testing the water sources, mapping the aquifer. Sarah met his eyes steadily. You've known about this too, haven't you? That's why you've been meeting with them so regularly. Webb's jaw worked, but he didn't deny it. David Chen placed a restraining hand on his arm, whispering something Sarah couldn't hear. The question before us tonight isn't whether Thornton wants our water, Sarah continued. It's what we're going to do about it, because I have something they don't. She nodded to Bernard again, who held up the 1882 deed. This is an original land grant to the Hollister family, dated 1882. It grants my family senior water rights to all sources originating on or passing through our property, including the aquifer that feeds into neighboring ranches. The room erupted. Ranchers stood, some shouting questions, others arguing with neighbors. Webb looked like he might explode. Chen's expression remained carefully neutral, but Sarah saw the calculation in his eyes. Bernard raised his hands for quiet. Let her finish, please. After several minutes, the room settled enough for Sarah to continue. I could use these water rights the way Thornton wants to use them, Sarah said, her voice carrying across the now quiet room. I could charge whatever I want for access. I could deny water to people I don't like. I could become wealthy beyond measure by exploiting a resource my family has legal claim to. She paused, letting that sink in. But that's not who we are. That's not who the Hollister family has ever been. Jack stood slowly, moving to stand beside his daughter. My grandfather could have enforced these rights 100 years ago. My father could have done it 50 years ago. They chose not to, because they understood something fundamental. Water isn't just property, it's life, and controlling life for profit makes you something less than human. Sarah continued, so here's what we're proposing. A community water cooperative. The Hollister family maintains our legal water rights, but we share access to the aquifer with every rancher who wants to join. Fair rates that cover infrastructure and maintenance. No exploitation, no price gouging, just neighbors helping neighbors survive this drought together. Bernard stepped forward with a stack of documents. These are cooperative agreements. They're legally binding contracts that guarantee water access at sustainable rates. They protect small ranchers from being squeezed out by corporate interests, and they ensure that the aquifer is managed responsibly for future generations. Martha Peterson stood up from the third row. What's the catch? No catch, Sarah said. You sign the agreement, you get water access. You pay your fair share of costs. You commit to sustainable use. That's it. And what about those who already sold to Thornton? Someone called out. The cooperative is open to current landowners. If you've already sold, that's your choice and I respect it. But for everyone else, this is an alternative. A way to keep your land in your family instead of selling it off to developers. Clayton Webb stood again, his face a mask of fury. This is nothing but a power grab. She's using those old deeds to control everyone, making you all dependent on Hollister charity. It's not charity when you pay for it, Jack said calmly, and it's not control when everyone has equal access. What Thornton is offering is control. They want to own the water, own the land, own this entire region. All we're offering is cooperation. Webb turned to face the crowd. Don't let them fool you. Sarah Hollister isn't even a real Hollister. She's an orphan. Jack picked up 20 years ago. No blood connection to this family. No real stake in this legacy. She's trying to use your desperation to build her own empire. The words hung in the air like acid. Sarah felt the familiar sting of being called unwanted, being told she didn't belong. For a moment she was 8 years old again, hearing families at the orphanage explain why they didn't want her. But then Jack stepped forward, his voice thundering across the room with a strength that belied his weakened heart. "You watch your mouth when you talk about my daughter. Your adopted daughter. Not real family. She's more family than blood ever made anyone. Sarah has worked this ranch for 20 years. She's earned every inch of respect she has, and she's showing more integrity in this moment than you've shown in your entire life." Jack's face was flushed, his breathing labored, but his eyes blazed with protective fury. "My father knew your father was a greedy man willing to exploit people for profit. That's why he ended their partnership. And I see that same greed in you now, selling out your neighbors to line your own pockets." Webb took a step forward, his fists clenched. "Your father stole from mine, cheated him out of his rightful share of the water. That's the real Hollister legacy. Theft dressed up as nobility." "That's a lie," Jack said. "Is it? Ask yourself why your father kept those deeds hidden, why he never told you about them. Because he knew they were built on betrayal." Sarah saw her father's face go pale, saw him touch his chest. She moved to his side immediately. "Dad, sit down." "I'm fine," but his voice was strained and sweat beaded on his forehead. David Chen stood smoothly, his corporate calm a stark contrast to Webb's rage. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's all take a breath here. This is getting too emotional. The fact is, Thornton Development has made legitimate business offers for properties in this region. We've done extensive research, we've been transparent about our intentions, and we've offered fair compensation." "Transparent?" Sarah shot back. "You never told anyone about the aquifer. You let people sell their land for a fraction of what it's worth, because they didn't know what they actually had. We're under no legal obligation to disclose our research findings. That's basic business practice." Chen's smile was patient, condescending. "And as for these water rights, Miss Hollister is claiming, we'll be happy to litigate their validity in court. I suspect a judge will find that century-old documents don't supersede modern water law. Texas courts consistently uphold historical water rights." Bernard interjected. "I've already filed these documents with the State Water Authority. They're public record now." Chen's smile tightened. "Then I suppose we'll see you in court." "You can try," Sarah said, "but while you're filing lawsuits and paying lawyers, the cooperative will be operational, providing water to families who need it, helping people survive instead of exploiting their desperation." She turned back to the crowd. "I'm not asking anyone to take this on faith. Read the agreements, have your own lawyers review them. Ask questions, but understand what's at stake here. This is about whether we face this drought as a community or as isolated individuals that corporations can pick off one by one." An older rancher in the back stood up. "Tom Peterson, Martha's husband. I've known the Hollister family for 40 years. Jack's father helped me when my operation nearly went under in the 80s. Didn't ask for anything in return, just said neighbors help neighbors. I'm signing this cooperative agreement, and I'd encourage everyone else to do the same." Martha stood beside her husband. "Tom's right. We can trust the Hollisters. I can't say the same for Thornton." One by one, other ranchers began to stand. Some moved toward the table where Bernard had stacked the agreements. Others held back, uncertain, caught between fear and hope. Clayton Webb watched his support crumbling. "You're all fools. She's manipulating you with pretty words and false promises. When the Hollister ranch goes under, and it will, you'll all be left with nothing." "The ranch isn't going under," Sarah said firmly. "We have the water rights, we have the resources, and we have the community support. The only people going under are those who bet against us." Webb's son Michael stood and whispered urgently to his father. Webb shook him off, but Michael persisted. Finally, Webb turned and walked toward the door, Chen following close behind. As he passed Jack, he stopped. "This isn't over," Webb said quietly, his voice carrying a threat that made Sarah's blood run cold. "Not by a long shot." Jack met his eyes steadily. "Bring whatever you've got, Clayton. We'll be ready." After they left, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Tension remained, but it was mixed with something else now. Hope maybe, or determination. Ranchers clustered around Berner's table, reading through agreements, asking questions. Some signed immediately, others took copies home to review. By 9 o'clock, 15 ranchers had signed cooperative agreements. Not everyone, but enough to establish the coalition, enough to show that the community was willing to stand together. Sarah found herself surrounded by well-wishers and curious questioners. She answered what she could, redirected complex legal questions to Bernard, and tried to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. This was just the beginning. Thornton would fight back, probably harder than before. She looked around for Jack and found him sitting in a chair against the wall, his face gray and drawn. Miguel crouched beside him, concern evident in every line of his body. Rosa was on her phone, and Sarah heard her say ambulance before the noise of the crowd drowned out the rest. Sarah's heart stopped. She pushed through the crowd, reaching her father's side. "Dad, what's wrong?" "Chest pain," Jack managed, his breathing shallow. "Started a few minutes ago. Getting worse." "The ambulance is coming," Rosa said. 5 minutes out, Sarah took his hand, feeling how cold and clammy his skin was. "Stay with me, Dad. Help is coming." "The cooperative," Jack said, each word an effort. "Make sure it happens." "It's already happening. 15 signatures tonight. More coming." Sarah squeezed his hand. "But I need you here to see it through. So you hang on, you hear me?" Jack tried to smile. "Stubborn. Just like your old man. Learned from the best." The ambulance arrived with sirens wailing, paramedics moving quickly and efficiently. They checked Jack's vitals, asked rapid-fire questions, and loaded him onto a stretcher. Sarah climbed into the ambulance with him, Miguel promising to follow in his truck with Rosa. At the hospital, time became elastic. Minutes stretched into hours in the emergency room waiting area. Sarah paced, unable to sit still, her mind racing through worst-case scenarios. Daniel arrived with coffee she didn't drink. Bernard came with updates on the cooperative agreements. More ranchers had called after the meeting, wanting to sign, but none of it mattered if Jack didn't make it through this. Doc Harrison emerged from the emergency room at midnight, still in his surgical scrubs. His face was grave but not hopeless, and Sarah clung to that distinction. "He's stable. We're running more tests, but it looks like a severe angina attack rather than a full heart attack. His heart is under tremendous strain, though. If we don't do the bypass surgery soon, the next event will likely be fatal." "How soon?" Sarah asked. "I want to do it this week, once his current condition stabilizes, maybe Thursday or Friday. But Sarah, he needs absolute rest until then. No stress, no ranch business, nothing that will elevate his blood pressure or heart rate." "Can I see him?" "For a few minutes. He's sedated but conscious." Jack looked small in the hospital bed, hooked up to monitors and IVs that beeped and dripped with mechanical precision. His eyes found Sarah as she entered, and he managed a weak smile. "Some show we put on tonight," he said, his voice rough. Sarah pulled a chair close to the bed and took his hand. "You scared me. Scared myself a little bit too." Jack squeezed her fingers weakly. "Doc says I need surgery. Thursday or Friday. He says you'll be fine afterward, but you have to rest until then. The cooperative will be there when you wake up from surgery. Dad, I need you to let me handle this. Just for a few days. Can you do that?" Jack studied her face, and she saw the struggle in his eyes. The need to control, to protect, warring with the reality of his limitations. Finally, he nodded. You don't need me anyway. You proved that tonight. The way you stood up to Webb, to Thornton, the way you rallied the community. That was all you. You raised me, taught me everything I know. I taught you ranching, but the strength, the integrity, the courage, that's not something anyone can teach. That's who you are, Sarah. Who you've always been, even when you were that scared little girl who thought nobody wanted her. Jack's eyes grew moist. I'm so proud of you. You know that, right? I know, Sarah whispered, her own eyes burning with tears. Good. Because when I get out of here, I'm officially retiring, making you the legal owner of the ranch. It should have been yours years ago. Dad, you don't have to. I want to. The Hollister Ranch belongs to you now. You've earned it 1,000 times over, and I want to watch you run it, make it even better than it was. I want to be the one sitting on the porch drinking coffee while you handle all the headaches. Sarah laughed through her tears. Deal. But you have to actually sit on the porch. No sneaking off to check fence lines or argue with contractors. I'll try. You'll succeed, because I'm going to be watching you like a hawk. A nurse appeared in the doorway. I'm sorry, but he needs to rest now. Sarah stood and leaned down to kiss Jack's forehead. I love you, Dad. Love you too, sweetheart. Now go save our ranch. In the waiting room, Miguel and Rosa sat with coffee and concern written on their faces. Daniel had left but promised to return in the morning. Bernard had gone home to draft more cooperative agreements based on the interest from tonight's meeting. Sarah filled them in on Jack's condition and the planned surgery. 3 months later, the Texas sky stretched endless and blue above the Hollister Ranch. The drought hadn't broken, but it no longer held the same terror it once did. Wells connected to the aquifer pumped steadily, filling troughs and irrigation systems across 23 properties, now part of the cooperative. Sarah stood on the porch of the main house with her morning coffee, watching the sun rise over land that was officially hers now. The papers had been signed 6 weeks ago, with Jack watching from his favorite chair and grinning like he'd just won the lottery. His recovery from the bypass surgery had been slower than any of them wanted, but complete. He moved easier now, breathed easier, and had color back in his face. True to his word, he had stepped back from daily operations, though Sarah often found him tinkering in the barn or offering unsolicited advice that was usually right. The cooperative had grown stronger with each passing week. More ranchers had signed on once they saw it was real. Once water started flowing to parched land and dying cattle began to thrive again. The fees covered infrastructure costs, with enough left over to begin planning for expansion. Thornton Development had filed 3 separate lawsuits, challenging the water rights. Bernard had won dismissal on all 3, with judges citing the ironclad historical documentation and the clear precedent for senior water rights in Texas law. Chen and his lawyers had finally stopped trying, though Sarah knew they were still looking for angles. Clayton Webb had been the holdout, refusing to join the cooperative even as his own wells ran dry. His pride had cost him dearly. 2 weeks ago, he had been forced to sell half his ranch to cover debts, not to Thornton, but to a family operation from Oklahoma, who immediately joined the cooperative. Webb's son Michael had approached Sarah privately last week. He wanted to sign the cooperative agreement for the remaining Webb property, against his father's wishes. Sarah had accepted, understanding that sometimes children had to save their parents from their own stubbornness. The sound of boots on the porch steps drew her attention. Jack climbed up slowly but steadily, carrying his own coffee mug. He had gained back some of the weight he'd lost during his illness, and the haunted look had left his eyes. "Morning," he said, settling into the rocking chair he'd claimed as his retirement throne. "Morning, Dad. How'd you sleep?" Like a man without the weight of the world on his shoulders. He sipped his coffee and gazed out at the land, never realized how exhausting it was, carrying all that responsibility alone. "Retirement suits me. You're not retired. You're Consulting means I get to tell you what I think, and you get to ignore me if you want. It's a good arrangement. Sarah laughed. I almost never ignore you. Almost. That's the key word. Jack turned serious. Got a call from the bank yesterday. They want to do a story about the cooperative for their regional magazine. Show it as an example of innovative water management. What did you tell them? That they should talk to you. You're the one who made this happen. We made it happen. All of us together. True enough, but we're the one with the vision to see beyond just saving our ranch. You saw how to save everyone. Jack paused. Your grandfather would have been proud. So would your mother. Sarah felt the familiar warmth those words always brought. I had good teachers. A truck pulled into the driveway, and Sarah recognized Daniel's vehicle. He had been coming around more often in recent weeks, helping with surveying work for the cooperative, and spending more time with Sarah when the work was done. They had gone on that dinner date he'd promised, then another, and another. Nothing rushed, nothing forced. Just two people who had known each other their whole lives, finally acknowledging what had always been there. Daniel climbed out with a rolled set of plans under one arm, and a smile that made Sarah's heart do things she was still getting used to. Morning, Jack. Sarah. He climbed the porch steps. Got the survey results back from the Peterson expansion. Their new well hit the aquifer at exactly the depth we predicted. Should be pumping by end of week. That's great news, Sarah said. Martha will be relieved. She called me yesterday, said it felt like a miracle, watching water flow after months of watching everything dry up. Daniel set down his plans and leaned against the railing. The cooperative is going to be studied in agricultural colleges. You know that, right? What you've built here, it's going to be a model for other drought-stricken regions. We built, Sarah corrected. None of this works without everyone doing their part. Jack stood and stretched. I'm going to check on Duchess. Leave you two alone for a bit. He winked at Sarah as he passed, not even trying to be subtle. After he was gone, Daniel moved closer to Sarah. So I have something to tell you. I got offered a big contract. Surveying work for a development company in Colorado. 6-month project. Excellent pay. Sarah felt her stomach drop. That's great. Congratulations. I turned it down. Why would you do that? Because everything I want is right here. Daniel reached out and took her hand. The work I'm doing with the cooperative matters more than money. And because leaving you for 6 months sounds like the worst idea anyone ever had. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. Daniel Martinez, are you going soft on me? Absolutely, and I'm not even sorry about it. He pulled her closer. Sarah, we've been dancing around this for 20 years. I think it's time we stopped dancing and actually said what we mean. And what do we mean? I love you, always have, and I want to build a life with you. Right here on this land, in this community we're all creating together. Sarah looked up at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. I love you too. Have for longer than I probably realized. He kissed her then, soft and sweet, with the morning sun warming them both. It felt like coming home to a place she hadn't known she was searching for. When they finally pulled apart, Sarah heard clapping from the bar. Jack stood in the doorway, grinning and not even pretending he hadn't been watching. About time, he called old. I was starting to think I'd have to lock you two in a barn together. Very subtle, Dad, Sarah yelled back, laughing. The afternoon brought a surprise visitor. A social worker from the county office pulled up in a sedan, and for a moment Sarah felt that old childhood fear, but the woman's smile was warm as she climbed out. Miss Hollister, I'm Janet Chen. I wondered if I might have a moment of your time. They sat in the office, and Janet pulled out a folder. I work with the county adoption and foster care system. We've been following the news about your water cooperative, and more importantly about your story. An orphan who found a home and grew up to save an entire community. Janet opened the folder. We have children in the system right now. Good kids who've had rough starts. Kids that families keep passing over because they're too old, too quiet, too damaged. Sarah felt her heart clench, remembering that little girl she had. I wondered if you might consider becoming a foster parent. Maybe eventually adopting if the fit is right. Janet pulled out a photo. This is Emma. She's 9 years old. She's been in the system for 3 years. Smart as a whip, loves animals, but she's withdrawn. Doesn't trust easily. Families meet her and see the walls she's built, and they walk away. Sarah looked at the photo. A girl with dark hair and wary eyes that reminded her painfully of her own childhood pictures. She's been hurt. They all have in one way or another. But Emma's special. She needs someone who understands what it's like to be unwanted. Someone who can be patient while she learns to trust again. Sarah thought about Jack, about how he had seen past her walls to the person underneath, how he had given her time and space and unconditional love until she was ready to accept it. Can I meet her? I was hoping you'd say that. That evening, Sarah found Jack on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and purple. She sat beside him and showed him Emma's photo. Her name is Emma. She's 9. The social worker thinks we might be able to help her. Jack studied the photo, and Sarah saw recognition in his eyes. She looks like you did. That same look of expecting disappointment. She does. And if anyone can reach her, it's you. You know what she's going through because you lived it. Jack handed back the photo. What does Daniel think? I haven't told him yet. Wanted to talk to you first. Sarah, this is your ranch now. Your life. You don't need my permission. I know. But I want your blessing, and your help. I can't do this alone, the way you did. Jack smiled. You won't be alone. You've got me, Miguel. And Carmen, Rosa, Daniel. If things keep going the way they're going, that little girl would be coming into a whole community, not just a house. It paused. When do you meet her? Next week. Janet is setting it up. Then I guess we better get the guest room ready. And maybe check if Duchess still remembers how to be gentle with nervous kids. Sarah laughed through the tears that had started to form. Thank you, Dad. For what? For showing me what family really means. For teaching me that love isn't about blood or biology. It's about showing up and staying, even when things are hard. You taught me that just as much as I taught you. Jack pulled her into a hug. We saved each other, Sarah. That's what family does. 2 weeks later, Sarah stood in the barn with Emma, the girl staying close but not quite touching, her body language screaming caution. Duchess stood patiently at the fence, her old eyes wise and kind. She won't hurt you, Sarah said softly. She's the gentlest horse on the ranch. When I first came here, I was scared of everything, but Duchess helped me learn to trust again. Emma looked up at her. You were scared? Terrified. I'd lost my parents. I'd been in the orphanage where nobody wanted me. I thought if I let anyone get close, they'd just leave like everyone else did. But they didn't leave. No. Jack, the man who adopted me, he stayed. Even when I was difficult, even when I pushed him away, he stayed. And eventually I learned that some people are worth trusting. Emma moved a little closer to the fence. Duchess lowered her head, and Emma tentatively reached out to touch the soft nose. The horse nickered gently, and Emma's face broke into the first real smile Sarah had seen from her. Can I come back? Emma asked. To see Duchess again? You can come back as many times as you want. In fact, if you wanted to, you could come back and stay. This could be your home, if you're interested. Emma looked up at her with those wary eyes. People say that, but they change their minds. I won't change my mind. I know what it's like to be where you are. And I promise you, Emma, if you give this place a chance, if you give me a chance, I'll be here. No matter what. The girl studied her face for a long moment, searching for something. Whatever she found there must have been enough, because she nodded slowly. From the porch of the main house, Jack watched with Daniel beside him. The younger man had a small velvet box in his pocket, though he was waiting for the right moment. Jack had noticed it yesterday and said nothing, just smiled to himself. She's going to be a great mother, Daniel said. She already is. She's been mothering this whole ranch and half the county for years. Jack sipped his coffee. You going to ask her? Daniel looked startled. How did you know? I'm old, not blind. And I've been watching you carry that ring box around for 3 days like it's going to explode. I'm nervous. What if it's too soon? Son, you've been in love with her since you were both teenagers. If anything, you waited too long. Jack clapped him on the shoulder. But ask her soon, because that little girl down there is going to need stability and family. Might as well make it official. Later that evening, as the sun set over the Hollister ranch, Sarah stood on the porch with the pocket watch her father had given her. It was newly engraved on the back, beneath the original family motto, "To my daughter, who saved more than a ranch. She saved a family." She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from unwanted orphan to ranch owner, from scared child to community leader, from someone who had nothing to someone who had everything that mattered. The land stretched out before her, dotted with wells bringing life-giving water to families who were learning to work together instead of against each other. Emma was in the guest room, reading a book that Rosa had brought her. Jack was in his chair, healthy and happy. Daniel was walking up the drive with flowers and that nervous smile that meant he had something important to say. This was family. This was home. This was worth fighting for. And tomorrow, she would start teaching Emma how to ride.